I'm Joe Getcho.
And I'm Mike White. And this is the Clean Comic Book Podcast. We like comics because they have no bones.
It's true.
Find us on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast or on Blue Sky Social or X at Boneless Comics 1. Because some idiot already took Boneless Comics Podcast on both of those platforms. So
it's ours.
Let us know who they are so that we can send a Black Ops team after them. And use the hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast to join in the conversation and share your thoughts.
That's right. And today's boneless review is going to be about wildCA.T.s Better Living Through Violence, written by Matt Rosenberg, penciled by Stephen Jorge Segovia and Tom Derenick, and published from 2022 to 2023 by Wildstorm DC.
And everyone, you will notice that we are only doing Better Living Through Violence. We are not doing Bloodshed for a Better Tomorrow. Maybe doing 12 issues with this many characters was a little too much for us to cover in one podcast. So we've scaled it down a little bit, but we'll still be able to kind of discuss the whole thing. So,
of course. Yeah. So yes, let us go over our story. So millions of years ago, an alien race known as the Cherubim fled their dying planet. Their scientists desperately searched the galaxy for a new home, but they found nothing. Until finally, a single suitable planet was discovered, but they weren't alone. A violent race known as the Demonites already called it home. The war between both races lasted millennia. Eventually, the Cherubim faced extinction, but a small and desperate group fled and found an isolated planet to hide on, which worked for a while. But our story in this volume is actually about a team called the Crisis Aversion Tactical Squad, or CRISAV, or CRISAV, CRISAV for short. One member of the team, Cole Cash, or Grifter for people who don't like him, is trying to convince a hive minion that the minion is unknowingly feeding the enemy, and if he continues, he will get the enemy one step closer to enslaving the human race. But then Xana slices the minion in two before he can respond to Cole to see if he's going to change his ways or not. Now he doesn't have any ways to change because he's been sliced in two. And also, people who don't want to live, instead of Xana, they call her Zealot. So don't call her that unless you don't want to live. So there's a lot of that in this where everybody has a nickname, but it's not really a good nickname. So their leader, Michael Cray, which is sort of his name, apparently it's complicated, and that's all they tell us. The people who created the program that operates his brain call him Deathblow, affectionately. They're looking for scientists to add a genetics research program. They're looking for scientists to add to a genetics research program, but when they find Dr. Tremont or whatever, he doesn't last very long. They find him killing and torturing monkeys for his experiments. Cole shoots him in the head. That's it. We're not using this guy. We're done. And then we have Adriana Tereshkova, a.k.a. The Void, who is apparently a teleporting cosmic god in a spacesuit. Their words, not mine. Teleports the team out moments before Nightwing and Batgirl make a cameo to address the friendly neighborhood terrorist cell, but they're too late. And we move on to a scene where Cole is in a bar and he gets in a fight over his past mistakes, but he's able to pick up a lead to Althea Labs, where a mission turns into a disaster. Cray is shot. Fairchild, who's this young kid with these like really superpowers, collapses, and Green Arrow apparently shows up and blocks their escape. Go Green Arrow! Anyway, so they barely survive. They stumble into a hidden Court of Owls lair filled with talons, cultists, and giant robots, and they make a harrowing escape. And that part was kind of exciting because I was like, ooh, talons, I know what those are.
Yeah, something I recognize.
Yes. So during a press conference, their boss, Marlowe, explains the corporation's goal that they work for is to fight for a positive future, and he introduces these guys called the Seven Soldiers of Victory, who he calls the greatest team ever assembled and the future of superheroes. But Cole realizes that it's just corporate optics. The Seven Soldiers of Victory are just a bunch of pretty versions that take credit for his work. So Pike, Cole's basically flashy counterpart, picks a fight with Cole, leading Marlowe to put Cole on a leave of absence. But that doesn't stop Cole Cash. He goes on looking for intel on the Court of Owls. He gets ambushed by a Talon. He's forcibly transported mid-fight with the Talon to go help the team when they're pinned down during a mission. So they bring him back in action when they're rescuing an ambassador's son. The team barely escapes with their helicopter being shot down, except Cole is left stranded in an unknown country, not being able to speak the language and having to flee from basically an army while he's on foot. Meanwhile, the Seven Soldiers of Victory are doing nothing except for taking credit for bringing Ambassador Walsh's son home safe and sound. The other members continue trying to find Cole, but he runs into ninjas led by Talia al Ghul's replacement in the League of Shadows, Angel Breaker, who was hired to make sure Cole never made it back home. He fights his way through them, but even though the Void finally manages to teleport him home, it doesn't look like he survived. But his death was a fake out. The Seven Soldiers of Victory, actually just the one called Majestic, pick a fight with Superman, who starts poking around Halo Corporation as Clark Kent to find out, what are these guys doing? Are they doing something nefarious, or are they actually on the up and up and want to help out? So basically, we end up with everyone on Chris Ave fakes their deaths. Cole is maybe dead, having tried to kill the Void, who wants to use Halo to take over and control the Void, but they're not actually dead. They're just kind of like off the grid to try to figure out what's going on. And that's really where that volume kind of ends. So I'm sure there's a lot more that happens. I'm sure there's a lot of context that helps a lot of this make sense. So if it sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm giving you a ton of information that's hard to organize, that's because how I feel. That's how I feel reading this. It's kind of like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff and it's all over the place. And I don't know who these people are. So that's my take on our story today for a little synopsis to get you started. We'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and we'll actually discuss all of that and see if I got it right, if it makes sense, and what we think about this particular comic. So stay tuned for more.
You're in the middle of a war as old as mankind. 10,000 years ago, 2 alien starships crashed here on Earth. One ship contained the last of the Daemonites, an evil race who once ruled the galaxy. The other ship contained a group of cherubim, noble warriors who defeated the Daemonites and brought peace to the galaxy. I immediately started assembling the cherubim and their descendants into a covert action team, the wildCA.T.s.
All right, we're back, everybody. So right off the top, I have been aware of these characters since the 90s. But I know that they've kind of existed in their own little niche. But this particular story especially follows the slow reintroduction of them into DC Comics, which actually took place in the pages of Batman Urban Legends, which was also written by Matt Rosenberg. And so Grifter, Zealot, and Ladytron all appear in that story. And they're basically recruiting Mrs. Freeze at that point, which you see her in this comic as a member of the Halo Corporation. Did this comic do enough to bring you up to speed, I guess?
I'm going to say,
I think I know the answer.
I'm going to say no. So the first thing is you referred to Cole as Grifter. So does that mean you don't like him? You called Xana Zealot. So does that mean do you want to die? Like on Deep Space Nine? but like I know those are their aliases, and that's names. Usually what we do. Yeah. Like we don't call Peter Parker Peter all the time. We call him Spider-Man a lot, and we know who we're talking about. But I just think it's funny. I'm like, well, people who don't like him call him Grifter. So if you're like, Grifter is a cool character, are you saying, is that sarcasm or not? But all that aside, like that was most of what I got from this is trying to keep the names of whoever is here straight and their powers straight. And so writing the notes for the podcast was kind of difficult because I had to go back. Okay, so this person teleported them out. Who's the teleporting person yet? Because there's so many different names. Like it shows you at first that we have a couple main characters that are on. There's like 3 people on the team, and they're introducing a 4th. And I'm like, okay, this should be pretty easy. But their support team behind the scenes is like, I don't know, 5 different people. And so that's really where I had the most trouble tracking was who are the support people. But the people who had got like most of the page time, I kind of got enough to, keep them straight. It was the support ones.
Yeah, so you've got Fairchild on the missions with them quite a bit. She's a 12-year-old girl that can transform into, sort of like the Hulk, except she doesn't turn green. She just
And
gets
she
really big and muscular
and
and
she takes a nap
powerful.
afterwards.
And yeah, but it takes a lot out of her to do that. So she can only do it for like short bursts. Uh Grifter, one of the reasons that he has that name that's not really a part of this story and they don't really explain is that he has been kind of like a petty con man in the past, and like he's good at sort of
Mm-hmm.
conning people and talking them into or out of things. And so a grifter is, somebody that kind of does those kind of
They
things. So
sort of
that's
alluded to it a little bit, like he had a shady past or something.
yeah. I mean, they allude to it, but they don't really get into it a whole lot. Zealot, you would be surprised to know, is actually 2,000 years old, and
Mm-hmm.
she comes from, at least now, what's been established is that she comes from a separate society that was established in Themyscira called the Coda, that are
Okay.
basically Themysciran assassins, exclusively. So they sort of were cordoned off from the rest of society, but Diana knows her because she was alive back then whenever Xana formed that group. So this is a retcon intended to kind of entrench her in the DC universe more. But even in the original comics, she was an Amazon that was 2,000 years old. So they just kind of went like, "Oh, Amazon, cool. We'll just sort of fold that into like the Themysciran backstory."
Mm-hmm.
So that's established in one of the backup stories that is actually in the trade, but not in the issues that we
Okay.
read today. Because there were a couple backup stories from Batman Urban Legends, and then there was one from the Wildstorm 30th anniversary that they go into the backstories of Deathblow, Grifter, and Zealot specifically.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
one
that
thing
would
you
have helped.
mentioned, yeah, one thing you mentioned about Deathblow was that like, oh, Michael Cray is maybe his name. So it is, but the way the Deathblow system works is they transfer, what they were trying to do was transfer all of the sort of fighting ability and awesome like military skills of Michael Cray into another body when he got killed. What they did instead was that his personality starts to kind of overwrite the host body every time they put it in. And so Cray had a falling out with Halo and with working for military contractors and all this stuff like before his death. So what happens is every time they transfer his consciousness, he's in a new body that has the old memories, but it also has Cray's memories. And so eventually he starts to sort of be like, I don't know if I want to work for these guys. And I don't know if I like being on this side, because his original memories of like how they treated him come back up. So
Huh.
he's sort of immortal in that way. I think, is it in this trade that he transfers into the android body, or is that the next one? It must be.
They moved him from like I think two different bodies. So first
Okay,
he's
yeah.
a he, and then he goes into a female body, and they're like
Mhm,
Michael, and they're like, yep, it's me. And
mhm.
then that's when they transfer him into the, what was it, Sentry?
Spartan. Yeah,
Spartan.
Spartan.
Spartan. This
Uh-huh.
is Sparta. Whoa, there goes my microphone. Got a little
Yeah,
too carried away.
the Spartan android.
Okay.
So that's another thing that's very different from sort of Wildstorm in the past, because Spartan, or John Colt, he's like, my name is John Colt whenever people call
Yeah.
him Spartan. He, is sort of an android that wants to be a real boy and all that, but they sort of overwrite him with Michael Cray in this story. So that's something that we don't really get to see how the rest of that plays out until the next 6 issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as you kind of know that Deathblow is being transferred from body to body and he gets killed a lot, but the DBLO system brings him back or whatever. It's a
Death blow.
that's
Yeah,
I know.
okay,
It's
sure.
silly. So
So
yeah, it was like death, or I forget. It stood for something, but
yeah.
yeah.
So with Spartan, there's a
Sure.
part where he goes to distract Superman so that they can get the
Mhm.
7 sons of stupidity out of the way. I mean, victory. And So he's like, Superman, I have great respect for you, and I'm only doing this because I need to stall for time. And Superman's just kind of like, whoa, what's going on? Wow, you're actually, kind of strong. Like,
Yeah.
all right, I have to be serious here. But was that interaction actually Spartan, or was that after Michael Cray had taken over?
That was actually Spartan.
Okay.
Interacting with him there. So he's kind of the Captain America of the team when you look at his personality. He's kind of like the guy that probably should be leading them instead of Cole, even though he's an android.
Well, he's just a bodyguard. He's not even on the team.
Yeah, which is a little bit strange. But in the original comics, he was the team leader that was out there, like kind of, giving them orders in the field and everything like that. And
yeah, because he seemed really interesting at that moment. I was like, oh, this character's got some depth that's kind of cool. And then he gets overwritten with Michael Cray, and I'm like, so what was the point of seeing him do some cool stuff? Because he was like really humble, and he's like, I'm so sorry about this, and I have such respect for you, and I've always wanted to meet you, and it's just not this way, and that kind of thing. And then all of that just out the window because now he's being overwritten, and maybe he comes back in some other way. I haven't read the whole story, so I don't know. But
yeah, he does.
Okay.
Eventually, I mean, and there are a lot of things that don't pay off until you get to the last 6 issues.
Okay.
And one of them is Spartan having his original personality restored. Deathblow actually transfers into Maul's body. He's the doctor that was on 7 Soldiers of Victory that turns into the big green and purple guy with like the horns on his back.
Oh, that's
Maul.
right. Yeah, he was at the board meeting at the Halo Corporation.
Yeah, so that's Jeremy Stone. He's actually their physician at Halo. But when they first introduce him, Cole's like, "That's Jeremy, my doctor," or something. They have like one line about it. But yeah, he's a scientist. He comes up with the way to do that to himself. And again, similar to the Hulk kind of.
I fell into some gamma rays and that I was
exactly.
experimenting on, and this is what happened. Yeah.
But this comic is actually a pretty big departure from what the normal core team was, because normally the original team was Spartan, Zealot, Grifter, Warblade, who is actually a villain in this story. Reno Bryce, the artist that's in like one issue, turns his arm into like this liquid metal and goes after Zealot, and then she stabs him in one scene. He's actually one of the core heroes originally of Wildcats. And then the Void and Jacob Marlowe are also, core members. Fairchild is actually from a totally different team, the teen superheroes called Gen 13. But for the purposes of this comic, she's on the Wildcats. So
had you read because this is sort of like a reboot, basically.
Yeah, it is.
Or a relaunch. So had you read the original?
Yeah, it's a relaunch. That's a better way to put it.
Have you read the original like stories with the Wildcats, or did you start with this relaunch?
Yes. So in the 90s, when Image Comics was really big, and if you guys look at Todd McFarlane's Instagram, he's got a story where he talks about the formation of Image Comics. But one of those people that left Marvel to form Image was Jim Lee. And when Jim Lee left, the first comic that he came out with was Wildcats. So these are all his original creations. He and the writer Brandon Choi sort of pulled their talents and came up with this. The whole Damonite Carabin War, that was all part of it. And so I actually had the first maybe like 4 or 5 issues when I was a kid and read them as they were coming out. Now, Image was attractive because they were the first comic book company to drop the comics code. So right from the get-go, they're like, we're not going to worry about being censored. It's not going to have the Comics Code Authority approval rating on our covers. Like, we just don't care.
Yeah.
So I think there's an early issue where one of the bad guys gets like their arm chopped off or something. And that was like, oh, can they do that in comics? Like now it would seem pretty tame. But at the time it was like, oh my gosh, they're not censored, But all the swear words and all that stuff was still censored, in the way that they do with all the symbols and stuff like that. But
I appreciate that.
I've been aware of these guys for probably, I wouldn't say 30 years, but maybe like 25 or so.
Okay. So that's interesting to note then that your perspective is you read the original, now you're reading the relaunch, and I'm starting with just the relaunch and have no
Right.
knowledge of the original or any of the characters. Like I haven't seen
Mhm.
them in anything else. Like a lot of the Justice League characters and DC in general, when you see them in different places, like I know who, you know, Nightwing and Batgirl and
Sure.
Green Arrow and all of them are, because I'm familiar with DC, but these aren't
Right.
mainstream enough that I've like really seen them, I think, in anything,
Yeah.
or if I did, it went over my head.
Mhm.
So it'll be really interesting to see where our discussion goes on this one and how we rate, because we're
Yeah.
coming at just completely different angles with this.
Yeah, for sure. And I've also watched, as one of the reasons that I was attracted to New 52 in the first place when that reboot happened is I was like, oh, I sort of fell off reading those comics a long time ago, but I
Mm-hmm.
remember the Wildstorm guys. They're in DC now. That's weird. And so I picked up the trade for Grifter and for Voodoo, who had their own titles right at the New 52 launch. And while they were treated pretty well, some of the characters like Fairchild did not fare very well. And Warblade, who used to be a hero, is basically like a merciless killer that just goes around killing women and children. And unfortunately, they still have not stepped that back in this story either. Like he's
Wow.
still like a brutal killer that's just protecting shady people, and that he doesn't really have a whole lot of depth to him.
Hmm.
Besides, they're like, oh, he's also an artist. Like, yes, that was part of his backstory, but he was a heroic character originally. So it's kind of, that's kind of a strike against the story there, because a lot of the characterizations of the characters in this are sort of returning them to, oh, this is classic Grifter. He's trying to do the right thing, but he sort of lets his like the small picture get in the way of the big picture
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times. And he's like, well, I don't care if this guy is going to help you guys with genetics research. I'm going to shoot him in the head because he was experimenting on monkeys, and that doesn't sit right with me. So
Yeah.
he goes off mission a lot, but he's really good at what he does. So that's why he doesn't get fired.
Well, and directly off mission. Like your
Yeah.
mission is to rescue this geneticist, and he straight up shoots him in the head. Like you not only
Yeah.
botched your mission and went off book, but you totally just undermine the whole thing that we're doing here. And it's surprising that he doesn't get banned or kicked out or arrested or thrown in jail or anything. They kind of just, they give him a little more than a slap on the wrist with, like, you know, suspension and kind of like telling him how it's going to be. But yeah, to your point, it sounds like he's just so skilled at what he does that he is important for the team, and it's hard for them to function without. And
Yeah.
this whole thing with New 52 is very similar, I think, to our Deathstroke review we
It
did
is.
at the beginning of the season, where it's like New 52 comes along and, okay, here are your characters. Now, some of them are the same, some of them have been enhanced, and some of them have just been really put through the ringer, and now they're just, you know, either they're killers or bad guys, or stuff has happened to them that's really bad. It's just totally wrecked their character. And it seems like this is another one where it's very different from the original, but
Sure.
we'll go into that much later.
Sure. So, Grifter himself had a title, like his own book during New 52, where he had his psychic abilities, which that's something that they don't bring up at all in this story
Psychic?
in any of the 12 issues.
Oh man,
But
that guy does not need psychic abilities.
Right.
Are you
But,
kidding?
well, the thing is that first they were like, he can detect aliens. So he was seeing like Damonites that
that
were
would have been
hiding
cool.
all over the place. And he was basically able to like infiltrate Damonite cells and all this stuff, because where they were trying to get into places of power, because he could see through their human disguise when they tried to look like normal guys.
They could see that he was a chicken boo.
Exactly.
And a
But
maniac.
later on, in Future's End, which is sort of a possible future of the New 52, but it has some canon value, I guess, to the whole thing. In that story, they revealed that actually, no, it's not that you can detect aliens, it's that you have the ability to detect deception. So like anybody that is deceiving you're gonna know it. That's one of the reasons he's so good at the grift. Is because he can read people super well, and he knows if they're lying or
like
not.
you're pulling a scam on me, like I'm not going to trust you at all, or
So
hey, you
sort of
actually
like,
are trustworthy. He could tell. That's useful for sure.
Sort of like Deanna Troi on The Next Generation, how she'll be like, that person's lying. or whatever, because she
Joy
can like
and
sense.
great happiness. Does he do that?
Yeah, he totally does. No, he doesn't do that.
He's
But
like,
yeah, so
joy and happiness. Let's get out of here.
that was a really cool thing that they added to his character in New 52 that I really wish was brought up again, because it adds so much to the team for them to be in any situation and him be able to be like, that guy's not telling the truth. Like, I know he's full of crap.
Right.
So, but that's not addressed at all in this story. And really, my biggest problem with this story is that it has a problem with explaining what the stakes are very clearly. So Cole gives you the story about the Daemonites and the cherubim at the beginning, right? But then Zealot's like, wow, your stories that you're telling these guys are becoming wilder and wilder.
Yeah.
Almost like that wasn't true. So
because he tells a couple other stories later, like in the bar, it's a little bit different. And
so in the bar, he actually describes the story of Final Crisis, which is when Superman and the entire Earth are enslaved by the anti-life equation. And so that involved multiple realities, because I believe in that story, and somebody in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe in that story we established that the new gods and Apocalypse exist outside the multiverse. So there's only one Apocalypse and one new Genesis. They don't have alternate versions of themselves. But for that reason, all of reality was threatened when the anti-life equation was found in Darkseid 1. So Majestic gets brought in to sort of fight alongside all these other multiversal Supermen. And the Wildstorm characters were involved in that because they were on Earth 50, which is an Earth in the DC multiverse. So they have been involved in DC events, and he's actually referencing things that have happened in previous comics. But
just not his.
Well,
some of it is
just
his.
Not. It's questionable whether or not it's canon, and there are nuggets of maybe that ancient war is still relevant in the next 6 issues. Cole actually goes to a reality, because when he shoots Void in the head, there's a whole bunch of energy released, and it disperses Cole into the multiverse. So he earth hops for a couple issues, and he sees a lot of different things. And one of them that he goes to is basically a carbon copy of the original Wildstorm universe, where Lord Hellspont, the Daemonite Lord, is there. But Grifter is like, what is the weird going on this planet? Why do they, and like his brother is still alive, Max, and like all these things. So that's very odd, because that Earth should have been wiped out when Flashpoint happened. But it seems like that story almost establishes that it still exists out there somewhere, which is really weird. But the biggest clue that Halo may actually be working towards something good is that Jacob Marlowe's password on his computer, again in like issue 8 or 9, is Lord Emp. And Lord Emp is his cherubim name. He's the Lord Emperor of the cherubim.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So that being his password is kind of like so maybe he is like the Imp from the old continuity. He just hasn't revealed that to everybody yet. But unfortunately, the story doesn't really do anything with that, and they don't really address the Daemonites at all. So you're kind of left with this, what is Halo trying to achieve? Because all we get is, well, Voodoo got a premonition of this thing causing a crisis, so you guys have to go there and stop it. And that's kind of all that we get in this story.
Well, it was kind of like, because they're kind of like a sub group or department of a branch of this company. So there's like the board meeting we see with Marlowe in charge, and then we see all the kind of like department heads giving a report, and Cole and Michael and those guys in Chrysav. I still don't know how to, is it Chrysav?
Yeah, it's Chrysav. Yeah.
Chrysav. We've christened the Chrysav. And so they are kind of like a group that reports to one of the like department heads or whatever kind of hierarchy. So it's definitely that corporate thing of like, the corporation is doing things, the CEO is doing things, but the group's really not privy to that. They're just more sent on missions to go and rescue these geneticists, or not even rescue them. They need to recruit one, I think, right? For whatever is coming up. And it's just like, it was one of those things where it's like, here are people, here are things happen. Ooh, flash, flash. But like, why are we doing this? Why do we care?
Sure.
What's our goal here? And, again, not having read the next volume,
Hmm.
I don't know how it all plays out, and that would definitely help me. But at the same time, like, I feel like by going down the path of like, oh, now he's exploring other Earths, you're just making it more complicated. And the first volume was pretty complicated already and really didn't give you
Sure.
like I felt like it was at sea in a lot of waves, but there was no ship, there was no life raft. So I was kind of just being
Hmm.
tossed around instead of if we had like a thread at the beginning of like, hey, let us know that, the CEO is a secret imp or whatever,
Yeah.
or
Hmm.
let us know that something, so we know something is cooking in the background while all this stuff is happening. But
Hmm.
like I felt like it was one of those animes where it's like flash, 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 but you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
but what's actually happening?
Hmm. So that's a very good observation because that's kind of a critique that you could level at all of early Image comics, and Wildcats were not immune to that. It was very much an artist-led initiative where they're like, we're
Mm,
going to draw cool crap and nobody's going to tell me I can't because we don't have editors that are sitting over our desk going, you can't do that. So
yeah.
it was very much led by pencilers. And then as the years went on, they started to go, crap, we actually do need good writers. And so they started to pull in writing talent to sort of right the ship, as it were, and give them a narrative that made more sense.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
so that's funny that you're kind of saying that about this because in that sense, it captures a lot of the flavor of those 90s comics.
Mm-hmm.
But in the other sense, we expect more story these days than that, and we kind of want to know what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, I was able to follow this a lot better, I think, just because I knew the characters already. Um,
So did it
Hoodoo
feel
is
like more of a stylistic choice to you than to have kind of just that like throw everything at you and let's go? Did it feel like this was more aimed at fan service to if you were familiar with them, this would be a good adventure? Because my point of view, is like, well, I have no idea what's going on, so I'm just
sure.
lost.
So the the biggest positive that I have for this, and one of the reasons for the rating that I'm going to give it later, unless you change my mind, is that the characters themselves speak in the characters' voices, and this is something that we haven't really had since DC, except maybe with Grifter, maybe with Lady Tron in the couple times that she's shown up, but they haven't quite seemed like themselves. And finally, in this book, Marlowe sounds like Marlowe when he talks. He's like, he's smoking his cigar and he's not going to tell everybody what's going on. And he's got his own agenda and he's not going to let them be privy to it. And he's like, just follow orders and be
Yeah.
good soldiers and go out there and do what I tell you. Um, Most of them, as far as how they act, has finally gone back to a place where I'm like, I recognize who these people are. And it's such a relief, I have to say, because they have not been handled well. In fact, arguably, the only property that was hit harder than the Wildstorm characters after New 52 was the Flash, who basically had his whole family and supporting cast deleted. And now they've brought them all back, and because the fans got really upset about that. But this book very much feels like an attempt to, okay, we're going to right the ship with these characters, return them to more classic interpretations of them, and send you on kind of a political intrigue thriller type mission that would be something that would be at home in the older comics. So tonally, it fits really well with like
Mm-hmm.
what I've come to expect. And so it feels like not a breath of fresh air. That's not the right word, but well, yeah, it kind of does. A breath of fresh air versus what I've been getting,
At least with
which
the
is,
character voices.
yeah, which is like little teases of these characters here and there where they're barely involved in other DC titles, but you know, they
Yeah.
haven't really been acting like themselves.
So with
So
the characters then, did you feel like having like the Court of Owls and Green Arrow and the
mm,
cameos, were those like kind of normal things that happen, or was that or was that the writers going, look, it's in the DC universe, Green Arrow, oh look, there's Nightwing, see, it's in DC, like to connect it? Or is
right.
that kind of like a normal thing that their stories do?
So Nightwing had been on their trail in Batman Urban Legends, which preceded
Okay.
this. Green Arrow felt tacked on, like he didn't need to be there.
Mhm.
It was funny
didn't even
that
say
Cool
anything.
Cash was like, they're like, which Justice League member is following you? And he's like, I don't know, Robin Hood. And
They're like, oh, he's not a threat. He doesn't even have any powers.
yeah, like, and he's like, are you serious? He's on the Justice League and he just has a bow. I'm pretty sure he has powers, guys. And they're like, no, he doesn't.
Yeah, 11 of them. You're welcome. Just like Hawkeye.
So yeah, I mean, it was funny. What does feel at place is the Court of Owls, though, because they're a secret society and we're doing secret operations where we're sort of, fighting various factions that represent corporate interests or political interests and things like that. So yeah, bringing the Court of Owls in, that kind of made sense to me. And actually, they continue on with it in the next trade where the leader of that particular cell of the court actually wants to try and take over the Halo Corporation. And then there's like another faction that also wants to take over Halo. And then there's Cole, who once he finally gets back to their Earth is like, you know what? I think Halo's rotten. And I'm going to take all of you guys from my team and we're going to take it down from the inside. And so that's sort of the direction that they go, is like they end up going against Marlowe in the end.
I think that was part of my issue was, as I'm reading this, there's just so much happening. That it's like this plot thread, this faction, that faction.
Yeah.
Oh, Angel Breaker shows up. Oh, I'm replacing Talia Al Ghul, by the way. Oh, but I know who you are. And he's like, yeah, I know you. And I'm just like, well, I don't know you. So, okay, whatever. But it was interesting to see how many different things were popping up, and I'm like, couldn't we have kind of picked one thing? Because like when they go in the basement, it's like, oh, the Talons and the robots and the cultists, and so I've been playing Assassin's Creed lately, and it was Odyssey, and it was funny to see the cultist with the like white mask and the robe, because I immediately thought of Assassin's Creed Odyssey and the cultist that you have to hunt down and assassinate as part of that. And so when I saw it in the comic, I was like, oh, hey, they're cultists. And then I saw the Talon, and I'm like, oh, Court of Owls. I'm like, yeah, this could be interesting. And then that sort of like disappears, except that that Grifter is going and looking for some information. He's doing some investigating. And I was kind of like, there was like this little moment of that set of scenarios that I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Where's this going to go? But there was so much around it to swim through that it just kind of got lost, and I got tossed in the waves again.
So yeah, it skips around a lot. And because there is a lot happening, there's a lot of characters, and I'll admit this is probably not a good starting point for somebody that doesn't really know who these characters are. But that's also one of the reasons why I picked it, because I was like, I'm entrenched in this stuff. Like, I know who these guys are when we set out. The Seven Soldiers of Victory, for instance, they were almost all representatives either of past Wildcats teams or other teams that were part of the Wildstorm universe. Like Mother One, who's the android, is part of Wetworks. Maul was one of the original Wildcats. Majestic was one of the original Wildcats. I'm trying to think who else was there. Threshold is a villain from the Gen 13 comics. Pike is sort of a Wildcats villain. So all of them were pulled from like previous things. And it felt like what Matt Rosenberg was doing was going, look, I know you guys haven't got your fix of these characters for a long time, so I'm going to put them all in this book. Like, they're all here. And so as a fan, almost every page I'm turning it and going, oh, it's that person. We haven't seen them in like 20 years in a comic book. That's cool. As opposed to you, where you're like, who is this?
Yeah.
And why do I care?
Who is this?
So yeah, this is a very fan servicey story. And I mean, I think that's hopefully come through with how excited I'm getting, like talking about it and everything. But yeah, as a longtime fan of these characters, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is what, like, I finally get to see the team back together. Yeah. My big problem with it is that they never do quite reveal what the stakes were for the Halo Corporation. What specifically are they doing to improve the world? Because if it's to fight a Daemonite army that's been hiding on Earth, which was their old goal, like, okay, cool. Marlowe is the kind of person that's going to be like, I don't care if we break a few eggs while we're, on our mission.
Yeah.
Not quite as bad as Waller, but sort of a similar vibe.
Right. And
And in fact, Waller comes in the next trade as well, and she's vying for control of Halo as well, because Peacemaker gets sent in. So yeah, it's a whole like all the intelligence agencies fighting each other, that kind of thing.
Well, and those were some of the vibes that I got as I was first reading this was Suicide Squad and kind of Guardians of the Galaxy, because Peter Quill sort of being like a coal cashed kind of character, shoot from the hip, run your mouth kind of thing. And so I was sort of linking that in my brain of like, okay, maybe that's how I can navigate this. But then with like the support cast kind of in the background, or like we have somebody who's a teleporter, we have somebody who can beam communication into everybody's heads, so we don't actually need headsets. And
Ladytron.
So we have all these extra support things going on, and but it's only like in that moment that you need that support that you see it. And that's kind of like the Suicide Squad game on PS5, which we absolutely loved, but we didn't we didn't play it at launch, so maybe that's why. But anyway, so like that, where you have your support squad back at base doing stuff, and then you have the team who's actually going out and doing the mission. So I was kind of getting that a little bit, but my problems were more of like, I didn't know who anybody was, but there was enough in the story that I got a sense of who each person, what they brought, and I could tell that the characters were very well developed. These weren't characters that were just made to be flashy. They threw them on a page and let's see what mayhem they do. I could tell that they were really well developed and well thought out and had a history. I just didn't know what it was, but I could tell it was there. It was the storytelling that lost me, where I didn't know what was going on and why we cared about these people and what it was that we were actually doing. And so that's what kind of made me lost the whole time, was like, why are these people doing this thing? Why is this an issue? And why did they care? Why are they on this team? It's not like they have bombs in their heads and they're stuck. So why do they choose to be here? Like all of that was just completely missing for me.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense from your
It's not on the page, so yeah, it would be.
I was a little bit disappointed that they named the sort of public team, so the reason that the Seven Soldiers of Victory get introduced is because Cole does something that's such a big mess that they can't cover it up. So Marlowe's like, well, we have to go public with Halo having superheroes now. And so he comes up with that name. Unfortunately, that is actually the name of a totally different team in DC Comics that are tasked with fighting an ancient race called the C.A.T.s throughout all time. So the Seven Soldiers of Victory, which I was going to show you the omnibus, but it's propping up my microphone right now. They consist of Frankenstein's monster, or just Frankenstein, Zatanna, the Guardian, which you may have seen him on the Supergirl show, although he's not Jimmy Olsen. Mr. Miracle, but not the new God's Mr. Miracle, a human one.
Weird.
Named Shiloh Norman. Let's see, the Bulleteer, who else? Oh, the Shining Knight. And so they all are at different points in the timeline fighting this alien warrior race. And they're a team in that they're all working towards that goal. But for the run of their series, they don't come together until like the last issue. So it's one of those interesting things where I wonder why Rosenberg picked that name, because it really has no relation to Wildstorm. It's a DC concept.
Yeah, that's weird. If you're not going to tie it to DC by having the actual characters from that story in it, you're going to have different characters for a different purpose. It's kind of weird to repeat that name.
Yeah, I was a little unsure why he would go with that, and instead of just calling them like Wetworks or Team 7 or something that actually Halo, is a or Halo, Halo.
Just don't call him Master Chief, because that would be confusing too.
Yes, it would. So not having as much information as me about these characters, I do like that you were able to pick up that they had some history. That is something that I feel a little mixed about, because I couldn't make out what was canon and what was not as far as their past that I know in this story. Because Grifter mentions multiple times in his stories that he tells other people that, well, I came here from another universe. So I'm like, does he remember the Flashpoint and like all of that? Like, what is he talking about? but it always seems to come out that like, oh, he's just telling a story or whatever. But it came up enough that I was like, okay, so is he the original grifter? And if he is, he should have his like telepathic abilities too. So that's a little bit strange. And the stuff with the Daemonite Cherubim War, it was like alluded to a couple of times, but I don't know if it's, even after reading up to issue 12, I don't know if that's still a canon to DC or not. It's a little bit unclear. So I was just, my gripes with this are sort of, be clearer about what your canon is and what isn't in the story itself, because this is the first time we've seen these characters out really as a team since before Flashpoint in 2011. So it's been what, 10 years now since that happened, and they had their own universe. So this is really the time to lay that groundwork and do like, we're going to do the world building and show you exactly what they're about. But what we get is the term is in media res, I think, where you're coming into a story already in progress and you have to just catch up, basically. Sort of like what FF16 did, except that it had the active time lore you could click on and be like, oh, now I understand what's happening in this scene.
And that's kind of what I needed was give me a page at the beginning or the end, or summarize the story, or tell me something. And that kind of makes my gripe, I think, even more magnified, that I didn't know what was going on and you didn't know what was canon and what wasn't. So we both needed something to kind of set the standard for what it is that we're actually involved with here. And that was really prominent because, you know, again, it's like trying to keep track of everything that was happening and then getting to the end and being like, oh, he's dead. Actually, he's not. He's alive. And we need to go figure out what's going on. So let's all fake our deaths. Whee! And I'm just like, wait, what?
So do you know how they faked his death? So
they pulled in a body from like the multiverse or something, right? So it was him, but from a different reality.
They killed a Cole Cash from another universe.
Oh, they actually straight up killed him.
Yes.
Oh, geez.
Void actually straight up killed the Cole Cash from another universe and then brought the body back.
So that's why he had to take her down, because he's like,
yes,
I don't like that you did that.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, so, I missed that part.
Yeah, that's why he was like, and the team wasn't with Cole on this, which again, this is kind of a pattern with him, where he just does things and then they kind of have to clean up the mess afterwards. So he's the, you know, sort of lovable screw up of the team, I guess.
Apparently. Yeah, because they keep like, oh, we got to find him. Oh, no, he's dead. We need to figure out what's going on. Like, I can't let this go. You know, he did it to himself, whatever. Like, they trash talk him like a little bit, but there's still enough that they're kind of like, well, now what, you know, kind of thing, instead of just being like, that guy was bringing us down. I'm so glad that he's not here anymore.
Yeah.
He sounds like a menace. A menace.
Zealot and Grifter have a romantic history in the previous comics. So that
it kind of seemed like there was something there.
Yeah. So that is something that seemed like it was there, but they don't make that explicit until the second trade, when they actually come together. And what happens is, during his multiverse travels, he goes to an Earth where Zealot has basically joined the Void and Lord Imp to dominate humanity, and they've laid waste to the entire planet. And the reason that Zealot joined them is because Cole died and she was in love with him, and she was like, fine, if the world doesn't have him, then I'll just join up with these guys and take over the planet. I don't care anymore. Wow. And so when he found out about that, he's like, wow, maybe Xana actually really cares about me. So like when he comes back, they sort of start that relationship. So again, that's sort of moving us back to a status quo that would have been normal in the Wildstorm universe.
Sure.
They also run into Damian Wayne and Raven on this alternate Earth, but that's
sure,
not really
why
relevant.
Not? Throw some more characters in there.
But yeah. So my question is, and I know the ending of this story, so it's not really fair, but do you think that there's room for these characters to sort of right the ship and make good on the situation when they're working for such a corrupt organization?
So
and I mean, they kill people too. Like, they unapologetically kill people as part of their missions. So.
Honestly, and this is gonna sound really bad, but I honestly don't know, because I don't know half of what's going on in this story.
Sure. That's fair. That's fair.
Just like like I get that the characters are, morally gray and those kinds of things, but I don't know why, and I don't know why they're involved with this corporation in the first
Sure.
place. Again, why are they choosing to be here if they're not required to be here? Because they're all employees. Because at one
Right.
point, one of them is going to tender their resignation, and like Cole gets suspended, like he is, an officer kind of thing. So they're all here, as part of a job. They probably have contracts, but I don't know why.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
makes it hard to really speculate.
It's hard to speculate about whether or not they can become heroic when you don't know
I
their
mean,
motivation
sure they
in
can.
the first place. Yeah. One additional thing I wanted to touch on that again was very much a, oh, thank goodness they've returned this character to a more traditional thing, is Caitlin Fairchild. So she was in New 52. You first see her as part of a team that has created the Superboy clone, and she's working with Rose Wilson, or Ravager, which is Deathstroke's daughter, and she was pretty morally gray there. Not as heroic as like we see even in this story. She was also much older, but then she gets her own team book, which again, we're going to gloss over that really quickly in the after show. Everybody watch the after show for this one, because it's really going to put into context more of like where these characters came from and kind of what their history is. But they ended the Ravager series with Caitlin finding out that she was a clone of the original and all the clones being destroyed, including her. So it was like, wow, that's so great for Wildstorm fans that you like killed the leader of Gen 13 and said she was a clone and never the real one. But in this story, we have a new clone that is actually acting more like the original character. And it's good just to see that the character is still alive, because the last time we saw her, it was like, well, she's dead, And so, again, a lot of these things felt like we're trying to right the ship. And I wonder if editorial even was saying like, hey, the Wildstorm fans out there are not happy. We want you to, sort of involve as many of these characters as you can. I wonder if it needed more than 12 issues to achieve that goal, or maybe they needed to spend all of the time in the first 2 or 3 issues just doing world building for you to kind of bring you in. And then you could continue with the rest of the series and be like, oh, now I get, what they're about and why they're doing it.
I think they could have found more balance there. I think if you go too far the other direction, then people who are fans who are showing up are kind of, like, okay, yes, I know. Yep, I know who Grifter is. Let's get to the, what's going on? What are they doing? What are they up to? But I think just a little bit, and kind of like I said earlier, even for you to say, here's what's canon and here's not, like give us maybe, because it also felt like we had a lot of story arcs and they were all crashing on top of each other. So maybe if we kind of strip the layers out and then we had a little bit of either flashbacks or some kind of narrative, or even Cole telling stories of like, this is what happened, then that gives you little tidbits to know what is and isn't canon. And it gives me a little information to go, okay, this guy has a past. Here's what, happened in it. And here's kind of where he's headed. Because you didn't answer your question, which was, are they too morally gray to take down Halo once they're revealed to be less than stellar? So do you
well,
feel
I know
like,
the answer.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what is the answer?
Yeah, so they do end up completely destroying the Halo Corporation by the end of the second trade.
Okay.
I think that Cole, as much as he's an idiot, he has a little bit more of a moral compass than some of the other ones do. And so he's kind of the one that really drives them towards justice in the end of the story. And part of that is him recognizing that, like, you know what? I actually have things that I care about besides being like a mercenary. Like, I actually care about Xana and want to have a future with her. And, I want to protect Fairchild and see that she's not exploited by anybody like this in the future because she has powers and, things like that. And so yeah, there's definitely room for them to turn around. And I really would be interested to see where they go from here with these characters. Unfortunately, I don't think they've been super involved in anything DC. It feels like they were kind of going, it's the 30th anniversary. And so they threw out a bunch of books at once. And then they're kind of exploring other Wildstorm characters in DC right now. So we haven't seen the
Okay.
Wildcats for a little bit, but yeah, I think that they can turn it around. I sort of squeezed this to make it fit into villains gear because I was like, well, they might do some heroic things, but they also cause a lot of collateral damage. So it's
Yeah.
like, are they heroes, or how do you quantify that? So
It makes sense.
yeah. We haven't really talked about the art. Honestly, my impression of it was that it was great. I really loved it. I don't have any kind of in-depth analysis of it. There's a couple pages where we switch within an issue to the guest penciler, Tom Duranick, and it was noticeable, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is different. It wasn't a problem. So yeah, overall, I have no gripes there.
Yeah,
So.
I enjoyed it. There wasn't anything I picked
Mhm.
out that I was, like, oh my gosh, look at that. But also I was kind of distracted trying to make sense of
Sure.
everything that was happening, that it was hard for me to really just sit back and enjoy the art of this one. So, but yeah, I didn't have any complaints. It seemed like it was pretty good. So,
Yeah.
all right, well, let's move to final thoughts.
All right.
All right. So, yeah, my take on this is probably going to be very different. And this is one of those where I feel like I need to give you a disclaimer that my score on this one is based on what I read within the pages of this story arc within Better Living Through Violence. So I'm not judging anything else outside of that, the Wildcat characters themselves, or anything besides what I read in this story. So what I read in this story, as we've kind of talked about, was we had characters that were well developed, so you get points for that. You get points for the art being really good, and this seeming like a universe that makes sense somewhere. Like, I had trouble making sense of it, but it seemed like, again, it's like I felt like as I was reading this will make more sense to somebody else besides me. So I give it credit for that, in that I don't think that the writing was bad or that the art was bad or anything like that. But I'm going to rate it what I'm going to rate it, because when I pick this up and read it, I have a hard time getting through it. I want to put it down, and I really don't care what happens next. Again,
That's
just
fair.
based on
That's
what I
fair.
read and how I felt while I was reading it. So this is going to be a solid 2 out of 5 bananas for me. And again, it's just based on this story. I'm really, after reading this, you would have to convince me to read something else that had the Wildcats name on it. But that isn't to say that you couldn't pick a really good story, maybe from an original run, that I would actually enjoy and be able to get into. So I'm not dissing the characters. If you like the characters, please don't yell at me in the comments. Although you can comment something nice and positive if you want. But as far as anything negative, there's nothing negative. It's just that I really just had a hard time getting through this and this particular story.
Yeah. So, I came into this wanting to go almost as high as possible, and one of the reasons is for what you said about the Negaduck story last time. I had some critiques of it that I was like, this just pulled it too far down for me, where I can't give it a higher rating. But you were like, I'm just so happy to be in this world, that it brings my score up, because it's just like, it's a joy for me to experience this universe again. And that's how I feel about I'm in the DC universe, but it feels like I'm in the Wildstorm universe again. It feels like these characters are acting the way they're supposed to. They're interacting with each other the way they're supposed to. Even the sort of old vendettas and personal conflicts, like Cole hating Pike, all of that stuff is a holdover from older comics that I've read. So I'm probably going to give it a 4, because honestly, I can't give it a 5, because I'm recognizing that, again, your problem was more of like, I don't know what's going on. My problem was, I can follow what's happening with these characters, but I don't know what's canon to DC now. And I need to know that so that I can put into context how they fit into sort of the larger universe that they're inhabiting. So on the world building front, I'm going to knock it down a whole point, because I'm like, Rosenberg just didn't give you any of that. He was like, here's the characters, here's the classic interpretation of them, and we're going to have an adventure with them, basically. And that's pretty much what you get. So as somebody that, again, is biased, and I feel like I have to put that disclaimer on here, I'm biased because I already loved these characters before I came in.
Right.
And I was already disappointed with the way they'd been portrayed in DC in the past. So this felt like not like a skip in the right direction, but like a lurch in the right direction towards like, oh my gosh, thank you. Like Cole is acting like himself. Zealot is acting like herself. And these aren't just like second string characters in somebody else's book, you know? So that was really satisfying for me to see. So it's going to be a 4 for me. Just for those reasons. So, you know, a 2 for you and a 4 for me is going to average out to a 3, which I think is a pretty good middle ground for where we were both coming from.
Well, and I think it makes sense because it's like, you know, a lot of stuff that we read, it's like, is this for fans? Is this for new readers? Is it for both? Is it for neither? And so this is one where we were very on opposite ends of the spectrum. So you can kind of walk away with, okay, if I know these characters and like the stories, then I can get into it and I'll find something to enjoy. If I have no idea who these people are, this is not the place for me to start. I should start somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of We Like Comics because they have no bones. Make sure you head on over to our YouTube channel at Boneless Comics Podcast, where you can watch the video version of this episode. Unless you're already watching it, then thank you very much. Give it a thumbs up and a subscribe. And join us for the after show, where we will discuss the writer and penciler from our story today and dive even deeper into the history of the Wildcats.
Yes, during the after show, we'll also be covering some listener comments from social media and giving some shout outs. So be sure to share your thoughts on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast or on Blue Sky Social or X at Boneless Comics 1. X. Use the hashtag Boneless Comics Podcast to let us know what you think of the Wildcats.
That's right. And make sure you visit our website at bonelesscomicspodcast.com, where you can get additional information about us, your hosts, and a link to our new Printify shop where you can get Mike's cool banana designs on t-shirts and other fun stuff.
So next episode, we'll be taking a look at Archie versus Predator, written by Alex De Campi, penciled by Fernando Ruiz, and published in 2019 by Archie Comics. Right. So don't miss it.
So if you're watching the video version, I have a Predator action figure. All right. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you later.
Catch you later.
Comics.